Illusion of Invincibility, the rise and fall of organizations inspired by the Incas of Peru. I am Viviane Barreto, Associate Dean for Global Strategy at FDC. The book is available in Audible, print on demand, and subscription plan by uBook. You can download the uBook app on your mobile or visit the website www.ubook.com. You can find the link to the book on the chat. I would like to encourage you to ask questions throughout our interview by using the chat. I would like to give a warm welcome to the authors. I'd like to say they are 5 hours ahead of us in Germany, so it's pretty late at night. So thank you very, very much, and it will be a pleasure to talk to you this evening. Thank you for your time. I would like just to introduce Andreas and Paul. Andreas is an entrepreneur, internationally experienced manager, and speaker on leadership, globalization, entrepreneurship, and holds non-executive board positions in a variety of sectors. He is managing director and principal owner of Longfield Invest, which focused on growth companies in various industries. In addition, he dedicates time as chairman of the private NGO Girassol Envie, supporting children and young people living in poverty. Paul Willians is an executive coach, internationally experienced manager and entrepreneur. Since 2003, the natural scientist and native Englishman has been managing partner at the consulting firm Paul Willians and Associates, specializing in leadership coaching, self-management, and organizational development. Both Paul and Andreas live in Germany, close to the beautiful city of Cologne. So thank you. This is a wonderful opportunity. I'm very, very happy and glad to be here with you today. You have launched the book in Europe, in the US, and now it's the turn. Now this is the time to have the book available in Portuguese. Well, you two have written a successful book called The Illusion of Invincibility, the rise and fall of organizations inspired by the Incas of Peru. Before we start going into more detail about the book, tell us, what made you write the book in first place? Who would like to start?
Well, first, before we really start, we'd like to thank you, our host, and the whole FTC team, and our friends and colleagues at uBooks, our publisher in Rio, to giving us the opportunity. We are really thrilled, and thanks for joining us for this live broadcast.
Absolutely, from my side as well, Vivi. Thank you very much. So I'll try and answer that first question. Basically, I was asked a couple of years ago by one of my clients, a company down in Switzerland, to support an employee of theirs, a lady who was going to be sent to Peru as general manager, her first major leadership position. Rosa de Oliveira is her name, and she actually is Portuguese. And she's watching tonight as well. And anyway, I said, okay, fine, sounds fairly typical job for me. I expected to travel to Zurich a few times, but the senior vice president said to me, no, Paul, I also want you to go to Peru and do a management workshop with Rosa's new team at the end of the process. So I thought, okay, fine, sounds nice. So a few weeks later, I was sitting with some old friends from when I used to work at Bayer. One of them was Andreas, and all of them had a lot of Latin American experience. So I said to them, guys, you can't believe it, I have to go to Peru on business. Doesn't happen every day of the week for me. And they said, oh, Paul, marvelous, but you can't just spend the time in the Hilton Hotel in Lima. You have to go and see this beautiful country with the people, the beautiful landscape, the culture, the food, and of course the Incas. And I said, yeah, guys, this is easy for you to say, you speak Spanish. I'm not an adventurous type. If I go on a trip like that, I would always go with my wife or with friends. And they said, that's fine, we come with you. So, okay, they left me no choice. And then they organized a fantastic trip. So we were 7 people in the end. I came out of the Lima Hilton after my 3-day workshop, and there they were. And off we went. And our first port of call was in Tipon, which is a beautiful site, 3,000 meters up in the mountains near to Cusco. And we were listening to our guide, and he said some very interesting things to us. He said, for instance, that the Incas, of course, were an acquisitive people. They were spreading their empire and taking on other tribes and taking over other tribes. But the thing they did that was so interesting is they didn't just make a hostile takeover, they actually made a friendly offer, first of all. So they had 12,000 troops at the ready, but they first of all said, look, we can do this the nice way, and we'll make a friendly takeover, and we'll integrate you into our culture, and you get some jobs, you can become part of what we do. And this was interesting. The second thing the guide said was, he said, once the Incas had taken over this new tribe, they would look very carefully at what the new tribe does better and did better than the Incas themselves. So for instance, that they build better roads or make better weapons or better ceramics or whatever. And they would look at this, and then they would spread this through the Inca empire further in a kind of a best practice approach, if you like. So thus they integrated the culture, which was integrated these new ideas, which is of course in a big contrast to what was happening with the European colonizers at the time, who would tend to stamp on the old countries, if you like. And yeah, but I can promise you it's mainly a very up-to-date book about leadership and self-leadership. 90% of the book is all about that, with plenty of black humor and 100% fun to read.
Yeah, and you know what, Vivi? It is like Paul said, it's not about a book about the Incas, but without the Incas, we wouldn't have written a book.
Yeah, it is very interesting. And as you said, there's a lot about leadership, and it starts by the choices that you made. You could have gone on one more business trip, or you could have the choice of making the trip of your life, maybe. Very, very interesting. And you touched some, Paul, you talked a little bit about how up-to-date the book is. And this is one of the first business books to talk about the COVID crisis, right? And the book inspired the Dean of FDC, Antonio Batista, to contribute a quote for the cover, where he describes the book as a must-read in relation to the crisis. I would love to hear your ideas about, like, what are the key things that leaders need to focus on when navigating through such a crisis?
Yeah, maybe I respond to that one. We are very honored that your dean actually quoted us on the main cover of the book, and the publisher picked it up. One of the first things, and we see this now, especially in a heavy crisis, which has never happened collectively like it is happening now, is you need to look at your strategy, and hopefully the organization you're working in or you're leading has a strategy. Check and confirm the strategy. Are we still on track? Is this strategy in a crisis still valid? Because a lot of people react in panic. What do we need to do now? We need to jump here and jump over there. So check and confirm your strategy. Maybe you make adjustments. Maybe you even need reassuring and or adjusting your strategy, because that's key. And maybe you even need to stay on course through the crisis. Number 2 would be value-based leadership. Because values and leadership have never been so important at the same time, because your organization is watching you and the company, and the people are looking at, are our values still valid in a heavy crisis like now? Like if you ever said people are the heart of our company and you're acting differently in a crisis situation, that could create significant damage to your reputation. And while people expect you to lead, it's like a ship in a storm. I mean, you need the captain to actually act and keep the ship on course. You have a leadership bonus in that situation. But that could easily become a leadership malus if you're not acting accordingly. And that means by acting right and keeping the values, you create a kind of a cohesion. So people stick together in a crisis situation, and you have to give them the feel that you're going to make it. through the crisis. And that could give you very strong tailwinds once you're picking up, once you're getting through, and unleash a lot of potential in the organization if you can create that positive cohesion within a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
We illustrate this, sorry, Vivi, we illustrate this in the book with some stories of our own, which we've experienced, but also from the very interesting selection of interviewees that we had. And this brings the book, if you like, to life. You know, it's not too theoretical, if you like. There's a lot of practical demonstrations of some of what Andreas just mentioned.
Yeah, this is one of the rich things about the book, is that you interviewed a lot of people, so you have so many different perspectives and so many candid stories there that there is a lot to learn from. And just going back to something that Andreas started to touch a little bit, I would like to hear you about leadership behaviors. Which leadership behaviors have shown themselves to be the most important in the crisis, according to your perception?
I'm going to start with something which sounds trivial, but is not trivial. It is number 1, communication. Number 2, communication. Number 3, communication. In a crisis situation, people want to know what's happening. Are we going to make it? Are we on course? What do we need to do? What is the company doing? Are we surviving? What are the next steps? What's going to happen tomorrow? So while communication is always important, once you think you're over communicating, it's probably right, and you need to stay very close to your people, and not just to your own people. And in different hierarchies, what has been important always is connecting to people. So while you can't have large town halls, you want to have a coffee with different people in the organization, even the people you normally don't talk to. Have a Zoom coffee with them, and ask them about their worries, about their proposals, about their suggestions. And then always, one-on-one is more than 2. And not just your own people, also your stakeholders around. You need to talk to your customers, sometimes to your suppliers, and connect with them, because that, you need to have your antennas out in the market, because your customers' behaviors and actions and activities can influence a lot your business, once even through the crisis and also after the crisis.
Yeah.
One of the main challenges, probably, Vivi, for senior managers in this situation is to stay humble and keep listening to their people. At the top end of a business, these people are often used more to telling rather than to listening to people. And during our research for our book, we came across a very interesting a book written by a chap called Daniel Goederwert, who used to be very senior at Ford. And he talked about the thin atmosphere at the top of a company, and he talked about when you get to the executive suite, suddenly the windows you look out of turn into mirrors. He talked about a hall of mirrors, and all you see is your own reflection. And all you see is you have people around you telling you how brilliant you are and telling you the things they think you want to hear, but are not necessarily the things that will get you out of the crisis. So it's all about staying grounded. And if you've got people telling you the same thing and not disagreeing with you, then this is a major warning signal as a senior manager. And our idea is, for instance, to go out and talk to people, listen to people you don't always agree with, and also go and maybe even talk to people you don't really like. Yeah, go and have a coffee with them and get the other opinion. It might be an awkward guy or an awkward lady, but listen to them, and they may tell you things that are very important to help you get through the crisis.
Yeah, well, that makes the whole difference, right? I just would like to remind our friends that are watching us that you can use the chat to ask questions. Your questions are more than welcome. Going back to the book, Paul, you were talking about senior leadership, for example, and some challenges for the senior leadership in times of crisis. Going back to the book, is this a book specifically for senior leaders, or is it also useful for developing leaders? Like, That is kind of a doubt that some people may have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good question. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we were asked a few months ago by a big social media organization to write an article for one of their programs, how to understand your boss. And so we looked not only into our research, into our book, into our research, and actually it is a book. Once if you're eager and ambitious and you go into your first job or in your first leadership structure and you want to understand organizations, we want to learn more about good leadership and other leadership, and you want to understand your boss in particular, how he operates, the kind of decision he needs to make. This is very good material to use.
We also realized often, we've done talks in the evening, live talks with the book here, presentations in Germany. And afterwards, we maybe have a glass of wine with the guests, and they often bring their partners. And we've talked to the partners have come up to us and said, you know what? I saw this book, your book on the bedside table in the evening next to my partner, and I saw it and I said, this is strange. What's the book? Management Incas? And I grabbed it and said, can I have a look at this? And I ended up reading a book. For the first time in my life, I read a book about management and leadership. So Andreas and I then realized, okay, we have something different here. So it's not just understanding your boss and organizations, it's understanding your partner. If he or she works in a large organization, doesn't have to be commercial, it can be an NGO or government, whatever, that we kind of had a much broader appeal with the book than we had originally anticipated. And maybe it's the little bit of, you might want to call it the infotainment factor, combining the story of the Incas and then the business side that we use the Incas as an inspiration, but then we go into. So that was quite a positive and pleasant surprise for us. Yeah.
Yeah, that is very interesting. And are there things in the book that you wished you had known before, earlier in your careers?
Yes.
Would you like to share one of the stories with us?
That's a bit of a tricky question. However, if there's one thing for me, I'm not sure for Paul, but there's one thing for me which is actually really hitting home on that question, is to deal with uncertainty. Because 20 years back, 30 years back, I would have probably tried to figure things out just myself. In a difficult situation, in a strategic question, I need to come up with a proposal or a solution. I would probably work very hard and then come up with a solution. In today's world, I still do it, but then I go out if it's important or a key thing or important strategic question. I go out to my stakeholders inside my organization and outside my organization, 3 to 5 people I really trust well and which tell me 100%, what they think. And then every time 1 + 1 is more than 2, and it adds incredible value, different points of view and different perspectives. And that really enriches my work and has made things so much better. Even this book, when it was 95% ready, we gave it to a very small group, 4 to 5 people from different angles and background. And they basically made this book a great book. On top of this last, very often it's like in sports, the last 3, 4, 5%, which are key. You need to have good work before, but then actually that makes it excellent and brilliant. And I do this frequently now, just talking to my stakeholders and others. And Paul is an important stakeholder for me, and I hope also vice versa, and also vice versa, I think.
Yeah, and you've been like working together since a long time, right? There is a piece in the book where you tell about a story where you were involved, and you think that Paul didn't know at that time, right?
Yeah. So,
one of the examples there that you bring up and you share experience, and it's very nice. It's very interesting as a reader to see it and the way that you kind of you bring the differences together. Fantastic.
I'm not even going to tell you how long we've known each other. It's too embarrassing, but it's a very long time.
I was going to ask.
Thank you. But maybe to answer the question from my point of view, Vivi. Perhaps with me, it's a slightly more personal aspect. Maybe that's to do with the fact that I do a lot of coaching, as you know, working with people on an individual basis. For me, I wished I'd learned a little bit earlier in my life that you shouldn't make your self-esteem dependent on what other people think of you. Yeah. I think if you delegate what you think of yourself to other people, then that can also be a source of unhappiness. Now, it doesn't mean to say you go through life as a selfish person, ignoring opinions of other people. That would be crazy and that wouldn't work well. But it's about finding a balance between being satisfied within yourself of what you're doing in terms of performance in your life, and of course also, allowing others to look after themselves as well. So that for me was a very important something I would like to have known a little bit earlier in my life. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. You interviewed a very interesting number of people, diverse people, while you were writing the book we just said. Could you tell us about some of them and their insights?
Yeah, absolutely. Very happy to do that. Perhaps I could start from the beginning. That a very gratifying aspect was how welcomed we were by the people in Peru when we talked about the idea of our book. They were so positive and supportive, and almost a little bit proud that we'd arrived and wanted to turn this concept into reality. So that was very gratifying. One highlight was when we met with a gentleman called Max Hernandez, Dr. Max Hernandez, who is he's a medical doctor by training, but he's been involved he's a grand seigneur of Peruvian society, really, in academia and also politics. He was a member of a board of advisors who were advising 2 presidents of Peru in the past, and a fascinating man. And he gave us an interview. And at the end of the interview, we asked him, we said, Max, is it okay for 2 European guys, business people, to come over and write a book about modern management and leadership based on ideas from the Incas, the good and the bad? And he said, hey, of course, the Incas, at their time, back many hundreds of years ago, they had big adversity, they had big challenges to deal with. And at the time, they were the most successful. They found the best solutions, and they were successful for a very long time. So there was sustainability in the air. In the end, of course, they failed for reasons that we discuss in the book. So he said, what better example would you wish to take as an inspiration for a modern day leadership and management book? So he gave his seal of approval in that respect, which was a relief to us. And then he added very wisely, and he's written many books himself, he said, and by the way, guys, your readers will be the ones to judge whether it was a good decision or not. So that brought us right back down to earth. So that was a wonderful meeting. Another of my favorite terms of messages from our interviewees was from a gentleman called Alexander von Preen, he's a CEO of a big company here in Europe. And he talked about his antenna. So, like an insect with antenna. And he said it's kind of some people call it the gut feeling. And he said, what you've got to be careful of is as you get older going through a company, yeah, you have a lot of experience, but these antennae can start to get a little bit bashed around and a little bit less sensitive. He talked about a half-life of about 10 years in terms of experience, and how quickly these antennae can start to get a little bit worn out. And the trouble is then you stop hearing signals in the organization. So what he does, he makes sure that he has a lot of contact with different people in his organization, but particularly across the generations, because values and beliefs and principles change and evolve across generations. And if you're still making judgments and making decisions based on a series of values you learned 30 years ago, this may be an issue in terms of reaching the younger generation within your organization. So we also like this concept very much.
Yeah, and if I may add, and he also said, I've been very successful a very long time, and then you tend to lose your antennas because you think you don't need them, because you're in your comfort zone, you feel invincible. So what the other's saying doesn't matter to me. So you get rid of your antennas, or you keep them in. So they said you always need to sharpen your antennas, in whatever situation, and particularly when you're incredibly successful.
Yeah. Otherwise, you get stuck in the hall of mirrors that I mentioned earlier, just looking at yourself and all these people around telling you how brilliant you are. So that was another nice one. Third one I'd like to mention is Catherine Duisman, who her story is quite fascinating. Her husband died very suddenly, tragically. He was the chairman of the board of the supervisory board of Duisman Company, over 60,000 people. And she basically stood in for him. She jumped in and said, "It's okay, I'm gonna take over. What you need to know is that she's American born and she's a trained actress. So not exactly what you would normally say, ideal qualifications to run a billion euro company. But she decided she would do this. But she said, before I do that, I'm going to use the skills I learned as a trained actress, and I'm going to see how life really works inside this company before I become chairman of the board." And so she dressed herself up as a cleaning lady, so like a janitor, so right at the bottom of the pecking order in the company. And she disguised herself for 6 weeks, and she was not discovered, not found out. And she went around and did the job of a cleaning lady. And she had some little things happen to her where she realized what was good and bad about the company. I'll give you 2 examples. She went out one morning and was trying to clean the floor of the underground parking garage where all the big bosses, the senior managers, would come rushing in their Mercedes and their BMWs and their Porsches. And she said it was like she was invisible. She was having to jump out of the way to avoid these guys coming in their big cars. So that was, experience number 1. And the second one that really did it for her was when she was just finishing her shift in the morning. And she was at the top end of the company at the senior executive level floor, and she was walking down to go home down this corridor, and 2 very senior managers came towards her, and she said to them good morning, and they just walked past her, ignoring her completely as if she was just didn't exist. And about 2 weeks later, she became chairman of the board, and these 2 gentlemen about a week later were no longer working for the company. So she'd seen what values were like in the company at the time and didn't like some of what she saw and dealt accordingly. Those are just 3 examples. I mean, we have an interesting list. We a very diverse list of people. We talked to Dr. Doris Day is a leading aesthetic and cosmetic surgeon in New York. We interviewed Admiral Joachim Rühle, who's at the time was the senior personnel manager for the whole of the Bundeswehr in Germany, the German Defense Force, with hundreds of thousands of people. Daniel Zimmermann, the youngest mayor ever to be elected in Germany at the age of 27. And Marco Aveggio, I should mention, who was our contact person in Peru, who organized some fantastic contacts into Peruvian academic life, which made the research for the book so much easier. So those are just a few of the very interesting people we talked to on their stories.
And?
And?
I mean, we're talking to a Brazilian audience. We're talking to a Brazilian audience.
Okay.
So we need to talk about soccer. And I mean, this is really one of absolutely my favorites, because we went for an interview with the president of a major European soccer club. So we go there, and he welcomed us on the premises of this soccer club, and we saw all these famous players and people there on the nearby pitch of the headquarters of this soccer club. And when we were there, they were just qualified. It was two games before the end of the season. They had already qualified to play in the EuroLeague, so on European level. In the next season. And in the next season, they actually dropped down to second. They basically lost most of their matches and dropped down to second division. So basically, Illusion of Invincibility live. But what we learned,
and rise and fall
of organizations live. But what we learned from him is basically 2 or 3 things. It's dealing with a lot of not only uncertainty, because you can't influence what's happening on the pitch, but he said the pressure you're having, I didn't imagine the pressure I was getting. He was coming out of business. The club was in a difficult situation. They got him on a pro bono basis. He said, I do it for the city and the club. I love this soccer club. But he said, it's like every game is like having a shareholder meeting. Every 2 weeks we have a home game. So I have 50,000 people in the stadium. I was used to have once a year a shareholder meeting with the shareholders, but I have a shareholder meeting every 2 weeks with 50,000 experts experts, which obviously know better, because in soccer everybody knows about soccer much better than I do, and much better than our coach does, and what should happen on the pitch. And he said, so if we win, we did everything right. If it's a draw with another important club, it's okayish, and if we lose, we get a shitstorm, every time we lose. So this is you cannot imagine the pressure. But the funny story is the sort of, when we were there, they were all over the top, and everybody was walking around like this, and he did also. And he's a big ego guy, and we met him. We're still in contact with him, but a year later they went down, and then they came up again. And but with soccer, I can go. There's a lot of learnings also in there.
Yeah, well, that's an invitation for all of us to read the book, because we can get to know many other stories that you bring in the book. I just would like to invite our friends to write their questions down on the chat, and questions can be written in Portuguese or in English. They are all welcome. Let me ask you a question about the Incas. Were there any any things that particularly surprised you about the Incas? What made them so successful?
And of course, it's a difficult question to answer. There are many, many factors, but the things that we noticed and inspired us also to write various chapters in the book was, for instance, number one was that they had a vision. They created a vision, and we're talking about 600 or 700 years ago, or even further back in history. They made an offer to the people around them and to the tribes that they were potentially going to take over, and basically said they would bring order to the world, which, if you look at the sort of 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th century, is a pretty attractive offer to make. Yeah, if you look at the chaos that was going on in Europe at the time and many parts of the world, a very attractive offer. The second thing is they had a very, very innovative approach to dealing with talent and development of talent. They would actually take the pool of sons of the Inca being the king, and he had a number of wives, so there was a number of sons, and this pool of sons they would put through a kind of a early type of assessment center and choose the next Inca based on merit and based on clear testing, which of course is a great contrast to the royal households of Europe back then and even today, where usually it's the firstborn son who becomes the king, and not necessarily based on talent or merits and qualification for the office. So we also looked at the fact that the Incas had a strong set of values. If you go to Cusco today, you see on the wall of the houses written ama sua, ama lula, ama quella, which is basically translated into the children of the sun don't steal, don't lie, and are not lazy. So they had a set of ideas, a set of guidelines which people could orientate themselves to, and which I think was way ahead of its time, if you like. And there were one or two other things. For instance, I mean, archaeologists say that they probably had the earliest type of welfare system. The Incas, if a family lost the breadwinner, so a soldier, the man fell in battle, the community would make sure that the family was looked after and was fed. And archaeologists also say that there's no evidence of hunger or nutrition during the Inca reign. So they were clearly able to feed their people as well. So these were some of the good things that we noticed about the Incas that inspired us to then bring that into the present day in the book.
And if they were so successful, what were the reasons for their later failure?
They basically abandoned some of their key principles. Let's take succession planning, which Paul just talked about. Just before the Spaniards arrived, the last Inca basically had two sons, two half-brothers selected as possible next Inca, but he didn't make a final decision, and he died of a disease. So these two basically started to battle and to fight, and they started a civil war against each other, which weakened the Inca Empire tremendously, which helped then Pizarro later to go on the side of one of them and basically defeat the other and bring the empire down. So this whole concept of succession planning did not work and weakened the Inca Empire. One of the main reasons is also the illusion of invincibility, because it was just beyond their imagination that somebody else superior could come on and defeat the Incas. And there's one of our forward givers, Nick Gowing, has written a book. It's called Think the Unthinkable. So if you can't think the unthinkable, and very often as a leader, as a positive, full of energy leader, you can't think of doomsday scenarios every day. So if you can't do it yourself, you need somebody next to you within your organization who thinks it for you. And let's take a company that's very debated. Some love it, some not so much, like publishing companies. Let's talk about Amazon. Amazon is a very successful company. Again, different opinions about Amazon. But Jeff Bezos said, Amazon eventually will fail one day. And it is our job today to prolong that time as long as possible, not to fail, and make sure within our strategy, it's within our risk management, and this is not happening. And there's an important part in the book about risk management and risk psychology, how to make sure that your, again, antennas are out there and understand what kind of risks are possibly coming. And it's like, I don't want to go even to the simple example like Nokia, which, ignored what was coming because they were 1 billion people on this planet. 1 billion people on this planet only 12 years ago had a Nokia phone. Only 12 years ago, 1 billion people had a Nokia phone. And you just have to ask yourself, how many people have a Nokia phone today? So it can come very quickly to you. So you have to imagine what could disrupt your successful model.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. Going back to the book on chapter 8, you address a very, very topical issue, the problem of the inflated egos. Could you tell us more about that, please?
To be successful, you need a robust and healthy ego, and to be a strong leader. What was very often forgotten between organizational leadership, healthy ego around leadership is self-leadership. You need to manage yourself, and especially when you're successful, you could fall into traps and self-leadership. And Paul can talk about self-leadership much better than I do, because he's actually part of his work is connected to it. That this part of reflection is important with strong ego.
I mean, there's nothing wrong. It's important to point out everybody needs an ego. If you're a human being, you need to have an ego. I mean, you have a degree of self-love, otherwise you can't survive. But managing that ego is one of the areas that if it's well managed, it's fine. But if it's not well managed, it can become very toxic for an organization and for the person themselves. And we actually coined a phrase in our book. We call it the Indiana Jones moment. I mean, I'm a big fan of Indiana Jones. Probably James Bond is my #1 hero, but just after that, we get Indiana Jones. Fair enough, as an Englishman. And if you think about Indiana Jones, he goes out there and sure, he gets the treasure, but behind him, he leaves piles of beautiful buildings that are just wrecked and have crashed down in a pile of stones and rubble, So there's a lot of collateral damage, to say the least. He goes back home to the university and says, "Hey, I got the stone, or I got the whatever it is, for his good of his career, maybe for his ego, but he's left all this damage behind." So we call these moments when, as a manager, as a leader, you put yourself before the actual issue that's at stake and ahead of the company. We call that an Indiana Jones moment. And without giving too much away, we both actually mention our Indiana Jones moment in the book, but that's enough. If you're really curious, then you have to read the book.
You read the book. I find it very interesting. You put on the book the egometer. How big is your ego? It's like a checklist, and then you can check how close or far you are from the ego problem. It's very, very interesting.
So Vivi, how did you do on the ego meter? How did you do?
I was very, very nice, you know.
Don't need to answer that question. We know. Top score.
Well, I would like to ask you a little bit about the feedbacks that you already had. You have the book launched in the US, in Europe. I would love to hear, like, what are the feedbacks that you have, if there were like any interesting story involving reader feedback that you would like to share.
Yeah, I mean, somewhere in the book we say, you know, if you like the book, at the end of the book we say, if you like the book, write to us, and if you see an interesting story which we should add in the next edition, write to us, call us. And actually people write to us and they call us and they send us their feedback. Most of it is very positive. Some people write and say, yeah, but I know all about it in there. I could have written it down, but you know, that's other feedback. But we get really fascinating things. The nicest thing is, I think, is what people write to us, which really struck us at the beginning, is written on eye level. You don't talk down to us. I read it and I say, well, this has happened to me, or I've been in that situation, or I should not have done that, you know, what you have done. So that's something, you know, we like very much. People say we're on equal footing, and it's fun to read. It's like Paul mentioned earlier, it's the black humor and the stories which brings the book alive, versus the classical business book, which is more dry content. So we may try to make it lively.
One senior manager wrote to us, he said, guys, why didn't you write this book 20 years ago? I would have saved me a lot of embarrassment and pain.
That's a good one.
Which we thought was rather nice. And certainly picking up what Andreas said, but for me as a coach, you know, it's terribly important to establish a respectful relationship with my clients at eye level on an equal footing. And to have that piece of feedback was very, very nice for us, for both of us. And, you know, people say you don't talk down, you don't talk down to us, you don't finger wag, you don't say, we know how to do it, you know, the better way. You talk about your own mistakes. And I mean, the Incas weren't perfect either. You know, at the end of the day, they made some mistakes, and we talk about those as well and to draw our conclusions from it. So
maybe one more to finish, because we went to a big publishing company where there's a big newspaper, and the editor-in-chief invited us himself to do the interview with us. So we felt very honored. It's a big newspaper publishing house here in this country. So he picked us up in the lobby himself, walked us through the newsroom so we could see, you know, how the newspaper for tomorrow was created. So we come to his office, and he's a very analytical, more introvert person. So we sit down and he said, well, Dr. Thiemann, you know, what's going to happen? And then he said, just before you start, I really like to thank you, because I look into your book every day, and especially chapter 6 is helping me a lot. And I was kind of chapter 6.
I whispered it's the mergers and acquisitions.
The merger and acquisition.
What's in chapter 6?
Exactly, merger and acquisition chapter. And he said, what you don't know is that right now we are merging with another publishing house. And but I'm the editor-in-chief. I'm also the managing director of the company. But I'm a journalist. I know nothing about business. But I'm sitting at the negotiation table because it's almost a merger of equals. And we already had 3 negotiation rounds. But now, you know, I look at your chapter 6, and it's not a book about merger and acquisition. It's 20 condensed pages about our suggestions, what you should actually look out for, the key things, essential things in a merger and acquisition moment. And so he started, so with your checklist, we have this stress test as a kind of a checklist. So in the next meeting and when I read it, I sort of asked 3 questions. What about this? What about this? And I'm actually wondering, you know, when we talk about selection of people, and everybody said, oh, you know, what's happening? This guy is actually, he knows what he's doing. So he said, your 20 pages, and obviously he had advisors with additional information, but just your 20 pages, they're worth millions for us, because that helped me to be a much better negotiator with some of the key issues in here. So that was a big surprise for us.
But you know, the annoying thing was he'd been sent the book by the publisher, so he didn't even pay for the book. So it was completely free advice.
And he said, I will give your book to a lot of people as a present, but only after the merger.
Yeah.
So
well, that is one great thing about the book. Like my experience reading the book was that you can stick to the piece that will talk about the Incas experience. You have the stories that you bring from all the interviews that you made, but you also have a very, very practical approach on the stress test. That is like an assessment, for example, and then you have the Inca insight. So it's a book that keep you engaged like all the time. So according to what attracts you most, you can connect to that. So that's very interesting.
Oh, thank you.
I think that, well, some people may be wondering, how is the book going to be launched? How is the book going to be available here? The book is available on online. You just download the app, uBook app on your mobile, or you visit the website www.ubook.com. uBook is the largest streaming audiobook app in Latin America. It's a subscription service for audiobooks and digital books by streaming. You subscribe and you have unlimited access to the collection to listen and read more than 400,000 titles among books, magazines, podcasts of various categories and languages. And you can also find on the chat the link to the book. So there are lots of options. So you can have like the Audible, you can have print on demand. So according to your preference. And one fun fact about the book, The Audible, was to know how interesting it is, the process of like doing the recording. It took over a month, and the recording in total, it's gonna be like 10 hours. But it's very interesting to see that, of course, it's not just like reading the book, but getting like all the things, the very little things that will be important for the experience of the readers. So this is uBook. They were really aware of it all, and even to find who would be the reader, they tried to figure out characteristics that would remind of you too. So it's a very rich process that sometimes the reader or the listener is not really aware of. And it's really rich. And I guess you also had some feedbacks all over the world, right, regarding other editions and other languages that you have the book.
Interestingly enough, actually, when the English version came out, the international version, a little bit over a year ago, I got asked quite often whether I was going to be reading, doing the reading of the audiobook. And I said, no way. This is a very, very tough, and you need to be professionally trained as an actor to be able to do this. I mean, I may be able to read a half a page in a consistent fashion, although it wouldn't sound very nice. But to do this page after page after page, no, really. I mean, this is very, very, very hard work. And, I have a lot of respect. And in fact, interestingly enough, the reader for the German audiobook, shortly after that, he became the voice of the Deutsche Bahn, the German National Railway. So now we hear the same voice when it says the 927 from Frankfurt has been delayed due to leaves on the track. Is this guy, Heiko Braun, who was actually just beforehand. I think he made himself famous with our book, and then the Deutsche Bahn decided to choose him.
So do we have some questions?
We're kind of running out of time. Time flies. We have like 8 minutes. I have more questions. I would like to ask you about like in the end of each chapter of the book, as we said, there is an Inca insight. And I would like to ask you, like, what are your favorite Inca insights? For example, 2 Inca insights, one from each one.
Ooh, there are so many great insights now, he said modestly.
I think I would say one of my favorites is those who can't imagine failing just have too little imagination.
That sounds good, yeah. And I guess one of my favorites, if you can combine ambition with values-based critical self-awareness, then you can achieve truly great things.
Yeah, wow, that is strong, right? that is fantastic. And I just would like to go back to one point that we touched about the values, the importance of values, and what really matters. We talked about the book. We talk about the importance of the book bringing the COVID crisis context. It is one of the few books that already bring this content in. And the more we connect to the Incas experience and the experiences that you see in companies, the rise and fall of organizations, what it is really important, what really matters. Like you talked about the values, you talked about the importance of the succession. I would like to invite you for like just a quick thought about that to share with our friends that are watching us.
Okay, sure. Absolutely. I think having strong values has never been more important. I mean, we all understand the concept of values. There are guidelines, a guidance system for us to orientate ourselves through the world, a compass. And it's vital to have a strong set of personal values, which you understand. Also that we have national values, different cultures are defined to some extent by the different values that they have, and also companies need values. And I think at the moment, more than ever, this is important, where a lot of us are working in home office, are working remotely. So you've got nobody telling you what to do. You need to understand what, to make decisions, what are the guiding principles that I need to have. So never more than ever before, these company values have become important. And one of my favorite definitions of culture, and let's agree that the culture is basically is built up on these values. My favorite definition of culture is basically that's what people do when the boss is not around. And that is really a marvelous thought to have at the moment with all of us working, not all of us, but a lot of us working in home office on our own. So in that respect, it's vital. And we had an interesting, another of our experiences with an interview with Gerd Storz, who is a senior manager at EY, Ernst Young. And he basically talked to us about a very simple matrix. And he basically said, and he compares values and ambition. And you have, on the one hand, a little matrix. And at the bottom right, you have people with no values and no ambition. You don't want to have these people in your company. At the top end of the model, you have people with high set of values, positive values, and also high ambition. These are people you want to have in your company. You want to find them, recruit them, and keep them. Then you have people with low ambition, but a high and positive set of values. And these are the people in your company that are really there as potential. And Andreas always talks about unleashing the potential of these people. And that's your job as a manager or as a leader. And then you have the people with poor value system, no values, but very high ambition. And I remember Gerd Storz saying to us very clearly, he said, and these people are dangerous. These people are toxic. You need to keep them away from your firm, from your company, from your friends, from your family. And I think sadly at the moment in the world, without wishing to get political, we look around the world and world leaders, and there are too many world leaders at the moment who fit right into this box. That's at a more national and international level. So values are never more important than right now.
And maybe one more thing, you look differently in today's world, who's actually contributing. And actually with this home office work and during the crisis, the whole blah, blah and show part goes away. So actually you see much more through your organization who adds value, who actually contributes and proactively contributes and is supporting. And normally in our speeches, we have a little exercise, let's say, just imagine the 10 most important people around you, yeah, who are working with you. If you could rehire them tomorrow, who would you rehire? And most of the time, I said, who would rehire everybody? And if you have 100 people, maybe 1 or 2 raise their hand. Who would rehire 50%? And most of the people raise their hand. So just imagine, say sort of the other half you wouldn't rehire. What does that mean? So like tomorrow you would say, well, I wouldn't have rehired that person, but while it is here, you know, let's stick with it. So it is not about hire and fire. It's about, if I wouldn't rehire that person, what do I need to do to actually, you know, bring her or him back to significant productivity adding? And then it's not about business only. It's about same thing in NGO and same thing in government organization, in non-profit environment. While it's the same organizational principles.
And
it's
just
our
before
job
we
to unleash that energy.
Sorry, please. I think I interrupt you. Sorry.
No, it is our role to unleash that energy.
Exactly. And just before we close, I have a question from Vivi Mauri. What is the next project?
You know why we are laughing? It is, while Paul and myself are aligned in many aspects, almost everything I could say, because we are at the same time, we are very, very good friends. This is one thing where, you know, we have not different opinions, but
yes, we have different opinions.
While I'm still dreaming of this, business thriller I want to write, Paul reminds me that.
I remind him that actually, Andreas, we now have 3 books on the market in 3 different languages. We have inquiries already. A Spanish book is planned with you books in the not too distant future. We have inquiries now from Vietnam. There's interest from China. So I have the feeling that we've still got our hands fairly full with the life cycle of the book we've already written. And every time the book comes into another language, we add new ideas. We bring it up to date, like with COVID now with the Portuguese version. So my feeling is we've got plenty to do for the time being. But anyway, we'll see. But thanks for asking, Vivi. That's a nice, the other Vivi, that's a nice piece of feedback too.
Yeah. Well, I'm looking forward to the next project too.
Oh, Vivi, I just said.
Absolutely. Let's talk about it offline. Let's talk about it offline, Vivi.
Well, I could stay here talking with you for hours. I know it's quite late for you. It's almost midnight there, right?
It is midnight.
Time to sleep. Thank you so much. Well, the book is just wonderful, extremely rich. And I have like notes everywhere here on the book. And I have the print version. And now we can have in Portuguese. It's even easier. Thank you very much for your time, for being with us. It's an honor for FDC to be here, to be part of the book launch in Portuguese with you. Would you like just any other final remarks?
No, just to say that the honor is ours, all ours. Thank you for having us.
And pleasure and privilege at the same time.
Thank you so much. Great to talk to you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.